Now to our first conversation. It's barely 4 days to the 2023 general elections, and still the focus is on the Central Bank of Nigeria's redesign policy. Diverging views continue to trail this policy as bank transaction channels are overwhelmed as a majorly cash-dependent economy attempts to switch to a cashless economy. There are reports of bank officials being attacked by angry customers, ATMs vandalized. Let's get a sense of the magnitude of the damage to the banking industry. Joining me now is Mr. Oluwole Olusoji, President, Association of Senior Staff of Banks, Insurance and Financial Institutions. Join us right here in the studio. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. And obviously, a currency redesign is something we should be, celebrating, at this time. But apparently, it's put a lot of pressure, on our financial system and on bank customers too. And you've been making statements about the damage caused to the banking system at this time. Can you paint a picture of what the cost is right now?
Yes, from our last check, we estimate that the total cost in terms of damage won't be less than 5 billion naira. Yes.
That's quite a sum. And looking at where we are right now, what are the options to actually fund this?
Well, sadly, it's the insurance companies that are going to take the hit on this, because all banks are expected to have some form of insurance. So we can see the impact of those actions on the economy itself, because it's going to trickle down the line from the damage to the insurance companies, to the investors, and all the rest of it, even to workers in the industry too.
And do you think the insurance companies have the capacity to handle this cost that we've estimated at this point?
I believe they do. I believe they do. Our insurance system is sound enough to accommodate it.
All right, you did mention at some point that you wouldn't allow your staffers actually go to work. That was last week. If these attacks, continue, where are you now on that?
Since the statement was made on Friday, there had been a lot of direct and indirect engagements from various parties that have shown interest eventually to the comments we have been making, and since we've been sharing affairs of this happening, because we had warned that there was a possibility of this happening. And so all those engagements happened through the weekend. We got quite a number of assurances. Some we're beginning to see visibly. We're beginning to get feelers that a number of the things that we demanded are coming into place, and we expect that all the other things will be put in place. And that was what guided our decision when we held an executive meeting over the weekend to review the position, and on act of faith of what we had been assured of, we asked our members to return.
Can you give us more details of what was agreed upon?
Yeah, the basic thing was about the presence of enough security, and for somebody somewhere to come out and speak against it, because the biggest challenge we had was that since the attack started, we didn't hear any condemnation at government level about the attacks, and it was worrisome to us. I know in the kind of environment that we are in, when there is that kind of silence, it's like a silent endorsement of those attacks, and it spurs them on to go on, because for them, they've been incited, they've done it, nothing has happened, and they're happy to go back to it again. So like I said, during the engagements, we spoke about all those things. And I think it was early on Saturday morning that I read the statement from the first PRO, Adejobi, who came out clearly to the public that anybody found attempting to attack a bank will be treated as an armed robber. So that was a clear statement. Those are the kind of statements that we should have heard a long time ago. I know that some police commissioners are beginning to talk as well. Yesterday I listened to a statement by the Lagos State Governor as well in that regard, and I expect that the same kind of communication will follow suit across the nation.
And definitely nothing, justifies bank equipment being vandalized at this point. But can you feel the pain of Nigerians at this point?
Yes, I can.
Having money in the bank and not able to have access to that money.
The interesting thing is that, when we talk about Nigerians, bank workers are also Nigerians. So we feel the pain. I feel the pain. I've had cause to look for alternative means of doing my transactions. The little cash I was able to get, I was forced to part with it at a point where I could have transacted my business in an alternative means. So we all feel the pain. And when we're talking of the pain too, our members are also under a lot of pressure. I mean, you see the crowds that are in front of banks, you see the crowds that are in banking halls. Our members since last year have been working 7 days a week to ensure that they're able to serve customers. So, when you are faced with that physical stress, and then you now add the mental trauma based on the threats and the attacks that they've been experiencing, then you can now put everything together and have a clear idea of what our members are also facing presently.
And the former Minister of Education did, say there that the commercial banks are not ready for this redesign policy. What do you think?
I totally agree. When the redesign policy was announced last year, we came out and we mentioned that there could be a crisis simply because stakeholders that would be involved in the entire process of execution were not carried along. So like many have said, it's a good policy. The challenge that has been with that policy is the level of execution. We need to be sincere with ourselves. Execution was poor. And the only reason execution was poor was because there was no engagement to look at all the pros and cons, to look at the possible challenges. I mean, we should look at the whole policy as a project. And when you do a project, there is a plan. You need to envisage all possibilities and have plans in place to be able to address those possibilities. And, in addressing it, it was one of the things that the president mentioned when he addressed the nation, bringing back the old 200 Naira notes. So those are the kind of things that we should have been prepared for. I would have kicked in automatically without having to go into meetings and closed-door discussions.
But we're in it now, we're here now, and the policy, has to go on at this point. What conversations are being had to actually, expand the capacity of banks, at this time? Even though, the banks were not really prepared, because it was quite frustrating yesterday. I was in a supermarket, trying to, make payments for some groceries, but at the end of the day, my app, it couldn't work. I tried to use my card, didn't work. Tried to do everything. I almost wanted to do maybe trade by barter or something, but I didn't have that access. So how can we make these banks, have that capacity at this point? How can we expand that?
Yeah, it's the stakeholder engagement that I spoke about earlier on. It was obvious that with this kind of policy, there would have been a massive migration of people from cash-based transactions to digital-based transactions, right? And so those were the engagements we were talking about, that you need to engage all parties that are involved in digital banking. Because mind you, it is not only banks that are involved. There are a lot of parties all around to look at the statistics of what their system is able to accommodate and quickly look at the kind of expansions that need to take place to be able to accommodate them. Now, one of the ridiculous things, again, that caused this problem is that the kind of transactions that should ordinarily have happened with cash were now being forced to happen. So, and those are the transactions that they are low value transactions, but they are large. So someone goes to the barber and wants to pay 500 Naira. Because he cannot draw 10,000 Naira from his bank, he has to transfer 500 Naira. I've seen people having to transfer 200 Naira. So someone was telling me yesterday that he wanted to buy a donut and he didn't have cash. So jokingly, he said when they told him that they were not sure he was going to succeed, he quickly bit at the donut and started eating it. Wow. Well, I've eaten it, we have to find a way of paying it.
He committed.
He committed. So he was fortunate enough that the transaction went through. So if all these things had happened right from September, when the policy was announced, it would have been much easier for everybody. But what we had was that instructions were just being dished out and everybody was supposed to jump on the wagon and follow suit.
Do you know anybody using the e-Naira at this time?
No.
Why aren't people using the e-Naira? Because that platform it's supposed to be seamless. It's supposed to be on the blockchain and all of that. Why is nobody trying that?
Well, probably the publicity and the campaign on it has not been enough. And this would have been an opportunity to penetrate into the system with it. It would have been the opportunity to go after the people who are still unbanked, because we still have a large number of Nigerians who are unbanked. So that opportunity, that window was there to put all those things to test and to make them work. So people would have seen the kind of alternatives that they had in their possession. And probably if all those things had happened and they had worked, there would have still been a bit of pressure, there may still have been a bit of discomfort, but it wouldn't have been at this magnitude.
All right, do you see this easing, at some point, between now and say after the elections? Are there any hopes that people will be able to, access cash easier, going forward? The transaction channels will actually work, going forward. Is there any hope of that at this point?
Eventually there will be. A lot of it is also dependent on CBN rolling out more money this week. The president has said, go on and send out the old 200 Naira notes. So if they are able to send out enough to meet those demands, it will be better. Now, beyond CBN and the banks, a lot of it also falls on our own part as Nigerians, because a lot of people have gone into panic withdrawals. So you're going to find people who are in possession of cash that they do not need. So it's practically turned into a daily routine that just go and queue and draw. So a lot of people are actually drawing cash that they do not need. So if we sincerely within ourselves know that we do not need that withdrawal, and those who are in that cadre go back home, you're going to find that the number of people standing at banks or at ATMs are going to reduce drastically, right? And with the rollout of the 200 Naira, it will probably ease out. It may not be as fast as we expect, but we hope that between now and the end of the week, we'll begin to see some level of reduction in the pressure. And then gradually we see how it goes on for the next 60 days.
Because we know there is a risk to holding cash that you do not need. There is, and that's why we have the banks. We want to keep our money there. So we're not at risk of losing that money. But let's look at the industry generally now. I'm sure prospective investors will be looking right now into the industry, and they might actually feel discouraged at this point, won't they?
Well, if they continue with the narrative that their problem has been the banks, yes, there could be a challenge in that regard. So it will take a bit to increase their increase their trust in the banking system. But I think a lot of people are beginning to understand that the banks were not their problem, and I think eventually they will turn around, because the truth is that if for any reason, for security reasons, for ease of transacting business and all the rest, we still need to go back to the banking system.
So the banks are not the problem. Who would you say is the problem at this point?
Well, it runs across a lot of quarters, right? But I think the biggest problem was when the CBN came out to say that banks were hoarding money. And our challenge to the CBN at that time was for CBN to tell us how much was actually injected into the system versus what was taken out of the system, and let us see if it was adequate enough to meet the immediate demands of people. Like we said, we do not expect that the CBN would have produced the same value of what was taken in. But what we expect was that the CBN would have been able to provide a fraction that will comfortably meet the needs of people.
All right, talking about the CBN now, what would you like to see, going forward? What kind of policy shift would you like to see from the CBN at this point to actually, solve this problem and let us go back to the way we were and somehow still push this cashless narrative?
Yeah, I think the CBN should do better in their means of communication. We're all human, we're all individuals, we're bound to make mistakes. And the beauty of it is that if we know that we have made mistakes, what we should be looking at is how to correct those mistakes, right? We spent too much time trading blames. Perhaps if the time of trading blames was spent on looking for solutions, on solving the challenges that were being experienced by everybody, we probably wouldn't be in the situation that we are right now. So communication should be improved upon. Engagement should be increased, because I've known the CBN in the past to engage whenever new policies were brought out. We always received drafts to look at, to come up with our comments, and add a bit of value to it. And in doing all those things, they collate them and then come out with a final draft for us to do. And then there is that constant review that goes on. But in this case, this didn't happen, probably because of the time frame that they put to the entire exercise. But even at that, I think we still had enough time for that engagement from the day the announcement was made. So those are the kind of things that I think CBN should go back to be able to build up more confidence in the cashless and be able to penetrate it, because there is no bigger opportunity that we have than now. This is the time to go into those areas where it does not exist. We have a lot of fintechs that are springing up all over the place, and they're very intelligent. They will be able to look at what exists in those locations, because in reality, we have a lot of locations that have connectivity issues. Some don't even have telecommunications in their region. So if one looks at how to address those areas easily, it will help the penetration, and it also empowers people, because what you would have done in that regard is that you would have brought up a crop of people who will have an additional stream of income, who will have a means of livelihood without leaving their immediate environment, and it will reduce the poverty rate that we have in Nigeria.
Well, it's quite tough in those rural areas. You have just one, bank branch, serving over 50,000 people. That's incredible. I don't know how they manage with that. But we've seen, Q4 earnings and, full year earnings for some of the banks in 2022. What are you seeing for Q1 2023 with all of this?
Well, for Q1, I mean, the first part of Q1 has gone. Now, what has happened in the last couple of weeks is going to have its impact, because when you look at the banks that were affected, I think we should start with that. Imagine that their businesses have had to shut down in those locations that were attacked and their equipment were destroyed. So there's going to be that kind of impact in that regard for them. Now, there was someone who I was in a joint discussion with. For him, in his own opinion, banks had funds with them that they could use as assets, to give out loans and all that. But if you go deeper into the economy, even the people that are doing businesses are now affected, because the buying power of people has been reduced, right? Because they do not have the cash to purchase. And if their purchasing power has been taken away, it now affects the manufacturing sector, because they have to reduce the volume of what they are manufacturing. If you go, let's look at agric, for example. I read yesterday that some people had to start selling their wares at ridiculous prices just to cut their losses. So at the end of the day, everything comes back. It's like a vicious circle within the economy itself. So yeah, there will be an impact on Q1. What we don't know presently is the magnitude. And obviously, yes, we do have that domino effect, for most of the sectors. I want to thank you so much, Mr. Oluwole Olusoji, President, Association of Senior Staff of Banks, Insurance and Financial Institutions. And I hope
we can solve this issue as soon as possible, because I miss, having to, do transactions easily without being afraid that it's not going to go through and all of that.
Yeah. It's our desire that things will change, and we believe it will.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you very much
for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a break now as the cash crunch continues to bite. Let's take a look at what to expect for the economy in the first and second quarter. That's our next conversation. Just stay with us.